In this video, you will learn how to graph more than one function and view them in the standard window. In the Graphing Functions video, you learned how to graph a single function in the standard viewing window. To graph multiple functions, the steps are the same as graphing one function, except you will enter in more than one function at a time. The editing procedures are the same whether you graph one or multiple functions. First, let's check to see that the plot modes are off. So what we need to do is we will hit the y = button right here, and if you notice, you can see that this plot 1 is highlighted. That means the plot 1 mode is on. So we need to turn that off. So how we do that is we simply take the cursor and we move it upward. And now you can see that we're on the plot 1, and if we hit enter, that turns it off. And we move the cursor down, and we can see now that it is not highlighted. For more details on how to turn the plot modes on and off, refer to the Graphing Functions video. Now, the next thing we need to do is to see if we're in the standard viewing window. So what we do is we hit the zoom key, and number 6 is Z standard. So we'll hit number 6, and that will put us in the standard viewing window. Remember, the standard viewing window, the increments are from -10 to 10 on the x-axis, and from -10 to 10 on the y-axis. Okay, so let's go ahead and quit out of this. Now, we're going to go ahead and start out with example number 1. We're going to graph two functions. So let's go ahead and enter in the functions by hitting the y = key. So the first function we're going to enter in is -0.5x² plus x minus 4. So that's -0.5x and then squared plus x, and remember this is the variable key you'll be using all the time, plus x and then minus 4. Okay, that's the first function. The second function we're going to graph is going to be 0.75x minus 6. So to go to the next line, we'll just simply hit enter. Okay, so let's input that function, 0.75x, and then subtract 6. Okay, now if we want to graph this, remember that we just go to the graph button and hit that. So there's function 1 and there's function number 2. So this is function number 1. This was the parabola, and this is the linear function, function number 2. And we can go back and look at those functions again, how they're inputted, by just hitting the y = button. So remember, this is the parabola and this is the linear function, and then if we hit graph, we can go ahead and view those. So here's the parabola and here's the linear function. Now for example number 2, let's go ahead and graph two more functions. So let's go back into y =. Now to go ahead and clear these functions out, we'll just go ahead and hit the clear button. Then we can move the cursor down to the next function and hit the clear button there. So let's move back up to the y1 function. Now we're going to input function number 1. So we're going to have y = log of x², then close the parenthesis. So for the second function, we're going to input the opposite of the absolute value of x plus 4. So let's move the cursor down and let's put in the function. Now I'm purposely going to input the function incorrectly because I just want to show you again briefly how to use the editing keys. So let's put in the absolute value. So we hit the math button, and remember we move it over to num to get our absolute value, and there it is, number 1. So we can hit number 1, or we can just hit enter since it's already highlighted. So we'll hit enter, and there's the absolute value, and let's just put in x, okay, and then we'll close it and we'll put plus 4x. Now remember, what I really wanted is the opposite of the absolute value of x plus 4. And so to use the editing keys, we simply need to bring the cursor to the front here, or to the beginning of the equation, and we want to put a opposite symbol here. So that's this key right here. So what we need to do is we need to go second function and then use the insert. So we'll hit that key, and then we hit the opposite sign. Okay, so now we have the opposite of the absolute value of x, and we don't want this to be 4x, we just want it to be 4. So let's move the cursor and highlight the x, and then we can just hit the delete key. Okay, so now we have the function that we wanted. Alright, so that's just a quick review of how to use the editing keys. So now we'll go ahead and just hit graph. So the first function it drew was the log of x squared, and here's the second one, the absolute value function, or the opposite of the absolute value of x plus 4. Now remember that this graphs in order, so it will graph this function first, and then it'll graph the second function second, and then the third function third, and so on. Okay, it graphs it in order. So let's look at the graphs again. So here's the log of x squared, and here is the opposite of the absolute value of x plus 4. Okay? So let's go back in here. And now we're going to go ahead and go to example number 3, and we're going to graph 3 functions at one time. So let's go ahead and hit the delete key, see what happens here. Okay? If I hit the delete key, notice that it didn't delete the whole line. Okay, it just deleted the first operation. So we'd have to hit delete again and then delete again to delete the entire function. Now if you notice, it's much easier, let's move down to the second function, if we just hit the clear button. So to clear the function off the line, just go ahead and hit the clear button. Let's go ahead and graph 3 functions now. What we're going to do is we're going to graph a cubic equation. So let's first graph y equals 0.3x cubed minus 3x plus 1. So we're going to have 0.3x, and then we're going to raise it to the third power, subtract 3x plus 1. So there's the first function. The next function we're going to graph will be y equals x minus 2. So let's go ahead and hit enter to move down to the next line. So x minus 2. Alright. And for the third function, let's just simply go ahead and graph a horizontal line. So let's hit enter, and we're going to graph y equals 4. So we just put in a 4 there. We're going to graph a constant. So now we have 3 functions, a cubic, a linear function. We also have a linear function or a constant function. Okay? Because these two are straight lines. This has a particular slope, and then this here has 0 slope. The slope is 0. Okay? So let's go ahead and hit graph. And it graphs the first one. There's the cubic. Then there's the linear function with a slope, and then there's the linear function with no slope, a constant function. So here's 3 functions graphed at the same time. Again, we can go back and we can look at the functions in here. And remember, if you want to see the effects of how some of these change, we just simply go back to the function that we want to change. Let's say we go down here and we want to change that to instead of being positive 4, let's say we want negative 4. Okay, so let's see what it looks like first. So here's where it is positive 4. Okay, it's right there. Alright, now let's go ahead and hit the y equal button, and then we're going to move down to the third line, and we're going to insert a negative value, or the opposite of. So we're going to go second function, and then the insert is what we want, so we hit this key, and then we'll hit the opposite sign, and then we're going to graph it. So it graphs the cubic, then our next function, and then remember the line used to be up here, and now you can see it went down here by putting the negative sign in front of it. So you can again use the editing keys to see what happens to a particular graph when changes are made. Okay, let's first go back and get our three original functions that we just graphed in there. So we do that by hitting the y equal button, and remember this was a positive 4. So let's go down to that function, and the opposite sign, or the negative value, is being highlighted with the cursor, so you can just go ahead and hit the delete key. And let's hit graph. So these were our three original functions and what they looked like. Okay, now what we're going to learn is how to get rid of one of these functions one at a time. In other words, let's say we don't want to view this horizontal line, we want to get rid of it. It's kind of cluttered here, and you just might want to see what two of these functions look like. Alright, so let's say we want to get rid of this y equals 4 line. What we do is we go into the y equal mode, or the inputting function mode, I should say, and notice that all of the equal signs here are highlighted. They're all highlighted. That means that you are going to view all of these three functions in the graphing window, and you can see that you can see all three of them. Okay, so let's go back here. So since these are all three highlighted, since the equal signs are highlighted, you're going to see all three of the functions. Now remember, what we want to do now is we just want to see y1 and y2. So we want to turn off y3. Well, to do that, we bring the cursor down to y3, and we move the cursor over to the equal sign, and then we hit enter. Now if I move the cursor down one, notice that the first two equal signs are highlighted. That means we're going to see the first function, and then the second function, and this y3 equals 4, we will not see that. Okay, so we will not see that when we graph it. So let's go ahead and hit the graph button. So we see the first one, and then we see the second one. And we do not see that line y equals 4, which was right there. Okay, kind of clears up your screen a little bit if you don't want to see all of your graphs at the same time. So let's just do this one more time. Let's say we want to get rid of the first function and not see it. Okay, without deleting it, but we just want to not view it at this time. So let's go ahead and hit the y equal button. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move this highlighting cursor to the equal sign. So we move it over 1, and then we hit enter, and let's just move the cursor down out of the way, and we can see that the y1 function, the equal sign, is not highlighted. The y3 function, the equal sign, is not highlighted. The only one that's highlighted is y2. So the only function that we're going to see is this linear function of 2x minus 2. So if we hit graph, there we have the linear function with a slope here. Now let's say we want to put back one of the functions. We hit y equal, and let's say we want to put back the y3 equals 4. We're going to move the cursor down to the third line, then move it over once to the equal sign, and then hit enter. Okay, now let's move the cursor down so you can see this. So the first function, the equal sign, is not highlighted, and y sub 2 and y sub 3 are highlighted, so you're going to see those two functions. So when we hit graph, we see the horizontal line, and then we see the slanted line. Okay, so that's just a way that you can turn the functions on and off without completely deleting them. And this concludes the video on graphing multiple functions.